It was 6:13 a.m., and yet the streets outside the National Bank of Houston looked more like the steps of a courthouse about to deliver a landmark verdict. Satellite trucks lined both sides of the boulevard. Boom mics hovered. Red lights blinked on dozens of live broadcast cameras. America wasn't just watching. America was holding its breath. The black SUV entered the frame with near cinematic precision. Unmarked tinted windows, the kind that don't just suggest importance, but threat. It rolled to a halt. The passenger. Door opened. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped out. No entourage, no legal team. Just her, in a navy blazer and heels sharp enough to cut glass. She walked with a calm that comes only from knowing the truth, speaks louder than any microphone. The anchor broke the silence. We're live as Congresswoman Crockett arrives for what may be the most consequential legal confrontation of the decade. Another voice chimed in from the studio, quieter, sharper. She's not entering a courtroom, she's walking into a bank. That alone tells you, this isn't a normal day in Washington. Because today, Jasmine Crockett wasn't confronting scandal. She was confronting something bigger. The untouchable. The narration on the live feed turned soft, solemn. They thought she'd stay silent. But now, the entire nation is watching her every step. She didn't wave. She didn't glance sideways. She walked like someone with nothing to prove and everything to expose. And then, the first shock wave hit. 17. AM CNN's ticker broke the story. Breaking. Rep. Crockett releases documents on 312 in undisclosed transfers linked to Thomas Family Foundation. On screen, a scanned document appeared, partially redacted, but unmistakable. At the bottom, Thomas Family Foundation, sublevel. Above it, the label, Humanitarian Allocation, Zone 7 Relief, except there was no Zone 7, no foundation website, no tax ID, no address, and no explanation for where the $312 million had gone. 4 banks, 16 wire transfers, all within 72 hours of the now infamous 9 judges hearing, the one where Crockett had stood alone and asked a single dangerous question. Who exactly do you serve? Someone had answered. Not with words, with money. That's why a crowd of reporters huddled outside a bank instead of a courthouse. Because what Jasmine Crockett was about to reveal didn't begin with headlines. It began with a paper trail, one that led through institutions built to remain invisible and ended with names carved into marble, the Supreme Court. 21 a.m. She stopped at the bottom of the bank steps. A camera zoomed in on the worn paper in her hand, edges frayed, like it had been passed around, hidden too long. She raised it toward the lens and said one sentence. Charity should never be a cover for tyranny. Twitter broke. By 6:28 a.m., Tyranny in Disguise was trending. By 6:33 a.m., TikTok flooded with reactions. By 6:41 a.m., the banner headline read, $312 million and one woman. And question. But what the public didn't know yet was how it had all started. Not with an investigation, not with a subpoena, not with a whistleblower at a podium. It started with something almost obsolete, a fax. 3 days earlier, 2:43 a.m., Washington, D.C. A single page came through the machine in Rep. Crockett's D.C. office. No return number. No sender ID. Just the screech of a dusty fax line and a faint whir as it printed onto letterhead from the First Federal Bank of Atlanta. The receptionist wouldn't find it until 8:11 a.m., face down beside the break room coffee pot. At first, glance, a misprint, blurry tables, strange acronyms, a yellow sticky note handwritten in block letters, "They're using charity to hide tyranny." She handed it to the junior aide assigned to screen communications, a former Georgetown grad student 3 weeks into the job. He almost trashed it, until he saw a name, Thomas Family Foundation, sublevel. He flipped the page. On the reverse, misaligned from the feed tray, was a wire transfer summary. 48.7 million. Destination: Global Human Rights Mission, Zone 7. Origin: THF sublevel allocation. 3BH. He Googled the organization. Nothing. No IRS record, no website, no LinkedIn, no Zone 7. He brought it to the Chief of Staff, who read it twice and forwarded it to Jasmine with the subject line, "You need to see this now." Crockett was prepping for a briefing on food security grants when the ping hit her phone. Normally, she ignored interruptions. Not this time. She opened the scan. Stared. Her first thought wasn't disbelief. It was recognition. She'd seen this pattern before, in audits nobody read, in funding gaps that conveniently appeared after dissent, but never this close to the top. She zoomed in. One bank code matched a known Texas holding account. Another was tied to a Bahamian branch. The third? A shell company address from a failed FOIA request involving judicial lobbying. She hit record on her voice notes. If this is real, it means the law has been funding its own silence. What followed was one of the quietest, yet most intense investigations ever carried out by a congressional office. No press. No leaks. Just a basement meeting room in the Rayburn building. Crockett's core team. Her legislative director, a former financial crimes investigator, a staffer from the Judicial Ethics Subcommittee, and a legal intern who'd been tracking. Ghost nonprofits since law school. 3 days. Dozens of hours. Hundreds of rows on a spreadsheet. By the first night, they'd uncovered 4 more transfers totaling $96.4 million. By the second, they had a full money trail, from U.S. banks to Ghost. Accounts to shell corporations. Every transfer labeled humanitarian, every account protected by tax exemptions, and every signature block labeled authorized by sub-level oversight. THF 9 times. 9 sets of initials. Not once did Clarence Thomas's name appear until they found one. A signature on document 4, misspelled, sloppy. But the tail on. The T curled just like it did in his court filings. Crockett stared at it, then asked, "Someone tell me, legally, what defines a charity?" That question didn't just start an investigation. It flipped the entire narrative. She wasn't accusing anyone. She wasn't yelling. She was asking. And that scared people more than any headline ever could. By 9:22 p.m. that night, Crockett drafted an internal statement. If the money is clean, the records will show it. If the names are real, the organizations will respond. But if none of that happens, we owe the public a question. Why are we funding silence in the name of compassion? Then she underlined it. Do not leak. Do not speculate. We bring facts. That weekend, Crockett sat alone on her porch watching a storm roll in, wondering how many people already knew, and looked away. By Sunday, she was preparing a classified briefing with judiciary oversight. No accusations, no names, just a request. A hearing on judicial exemptions in charitable oversight. That's when the threats began. An unsigned email to her chief of staff. You've had your moment. Jasmine, walk away. She printed it, filed it, moved forward. Because when someone warns you not to ask questions, they're usually the ones with answers to hide. Over the next 72 hours, the team mapped over $312 million in humanitarian transfers routed through 4 banks and dozens of fake nonprofits, every path tracing back to a shadow layer of the Thomas Family Foundation. The public one funded scholarships. This one? It moved money like a covert machine, and at the top of that structure sat 9 signatures, 9 names, 9 people, all tied by blood, marriage, or fiduciary trust to federal judicial families. 3 had direct ties to sitting Supreme Court justices. The intern wrote it on the whiteboard in red. Who are the 9? This wasn't money laundering. It was financial architecture. One transfer led to a shell company, Algin Trust Limited, British Virgin Islands. It received $74.2 million. It was active for 36 hours. Then it disappeared. But on the very day it closed, the Supreme Court Foundation announced a new initiative, Democracy Bridges, Rebuilding Civics Literacy in the South. The language matched a grant description from the now-deleted Zone 7 files. And the bank used? National Bank of Houston. The same bank Jasmine Crockett would walk into, on camera, 3 days later. She was ready. A single question circled twice in her notebook. Justice Thomas, how do you define a charitable foundation under your ethical standard? No accusation, just a mirror, and now the country was watching. Back to 6:44 a.m. Houston Jasmine Crockett stood just outside the revolving glass doors of the National Bank of Houston. The reporters had stopped yelling questions. The cameras didn't blink. She turned slightly, just enough to face the press line, and spoke into the mic clipped to her lapel. If you've ever had to show ID to cash a check but not to buy a judge, this is your story too. Gasps. Audible ones. Then a split second of silence before the explosion of flashbulbs and rapid-fire questions. But Crockett didn't flinch. She turned and walked into the bank. Inside, silence. Marble floors. Gold trim. 2 security guards stiffened the moment she entered. But she didn't look at them. She walked straight to the teller. I'm here to review account activity associated with Algin Trust Limited. You're holding $74.2 million that didn't exist last week. The teller blinked. Ma'am, I'd need a... Crockett slid an envelope across the counter. Inside, a subpoena. Not from a judge. Not from the DOJ. From the House Committee on Financial Transparency and Judicial Ethics. Delivered via Congressional Emergency Powers. Ratified 14 hours earlier in a 7-6 committee vote that broke historic precedent. You're not protecting client confidentiality, she added. You're shielding judicial misconduct. Behind her, the cameras were pressed against the glass, recording everything. The bank manager appeared. Then another. 3 suits. 1 earpiece. Then a voice from behind a mirrored door. We'll take you upstairs, Congresswoman. Upstairs. 7:03 a.m. The boardroom overlooked the Houston skyline, still veiled in dawn mist. A long table, 2 folders waiting, a laptop open, cursor blinking. Crockett placed her folder on the table. It contained every transfer, every alias, every paper trail she and her team had mapped out. The bank had no idea she had the exact routing number, the shell codes, the digital fingerprints. They thought they were negotiating. She was confirming. If this account exists, she said, and if these funds were held by this institution, then you've either knowingly enabled financial misconduct by a judicial entity, or you've been used. And if it's the latter, now is the time to say so. Silence. Then one of the bankers slid a USB drive across the table. We didn't know where it came from. The wire came in at 2:14 a.m., cleared under expedited humanitarian protocol. No sender ID, just the Zone 7 tag. It flagged in the system, but someone overrode it. Who? That's the thing, he said, glancing nervously at the others. It wasn't a who, it was a clearance code. Crockett leaned forward. Give me the code. He turned the laptop. The code, SCOTUS 9X8, 17 a.m. Outside the bank Jasmine, Crockett emerged. This time she did stop at the podium. I'm not here to accuse, I'm here to reveal. And what I've seen raises a fundamental question about trust, not just in our courts, but in our institutions. We were told charity was the noblest mask of power. It turns out it may have been its most effective cover. So today, I'm releasing the full documentation to the public. Every transfer, every entity, every unanswered question. Because if the highest court in the land won't hold itself accountable, the people have every right to. Then she paused, let the silence settle, and added, This isn't political. It's architectural. The money didn't disappear. It was designed to vanish. 1 a.m. Washington, D.C. The Capitol buzzed. Committee staffers scrambled. Law clerks whispered behind closed doors. Phones rang in the West Wing. Supreme Court justices rarely comment on news stories. But this wasn't a story anymore. It was a storm. And at its center was a congresswoman who hadn't accused anyone, just followed the money. 23 a.m., Twitter X Crockett's office posted the full 214-page PDF titled, "The Disappearing Dollar: How Charitable Design Concealed Judicial Wealth." Within 37 minutes, it had over 2.4 million views. One page caught fire immediately. Page 47, a flowchart showing money originating from Thomas Family Foundation Sublevel 3, routed through a shell company called Merit Bridge Holdings, redirected through Algin Trust, and deposited in an account tagged Zone 7 Humanitarian Civics Relief. Except the date of deposit, June 8th, matched the date of a Supreme Court decision in favor of an oil conglomerate whose parent company was a listed donor to the Thomas Family Foundation. Coincidence? One caption asked. Timing is a language, another replied. 2 a.m. CNN panel. Discussion analyst. This isn't just money. This is a new kind of power laundering. You take influence, sanitize it through philanthropy, and redeploy it as immunity. Anchor. So what happens now? Analyst. Now, the question is no longer, did someone take a bribe? It's, how long has the architecture existed, and who's still using it? Back in Houston, 10:26 a.m., Jasmine Crockett was already en route to a private meeting with the Treasury Oversight Subcommittee. But her job was never to end the storm. It was to name it. And as the first drops of accountability fell on the granite steps of American power, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Clarence Thomas, or a foundation, or even the $312 million. It was about a system that bet no one would ever ask. Where did the money go? Jasmine Crockett asked, and now the country wanted answers.